Something completely different now. Let's talk about a brand new book. It's the latest biography to be written by Sir Anthony Seldon, and it's his 8th biography of a modern-day Prime Minister, and it's called, bet you can't guess who it's about, Truss at 10, How Not to Be Prime Minister. It is, of course, about Liz Truss. Good afternoon to you, Sir Anthony.
Hello, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, what I find fascinating about this is that it's got 7 pages for every single day of her 49 days in office. A lot of people wondering, how did you manage to write a whole big, thick tome like this? And it's not, it's not big time, about just 49 days of a premiership. And why do you argue that it's how not to be Prime Minister? Tell us your reasoning.
Well, I think that she was a person who had great qualities, Julia. She was bright. She had an enormous drive and clarity about what she wanted to do. She wanted to get growth back into the country. The country had had very little growth for ever since the global financial crisis 15 years before. She was very focused and very, very clear. It was tragic that it went so wrong, that her premiership just blew up into smithereens, and with lasting damage, not least to the Conservative Party. The downturn in its fortunes following her, the loss of confidence was felt very strongly in the general election at the beginning of the summer, but also the impact on people's mortgages and personal finances, many companies, Britain's position in the world. She was denigrated contemptuously by the American president for her policies. I mean, it was so, in a way, tragic on one level, on a personal level, but tragic for the country. So how did all that happen? And in the middle of all that, Julia, Britain's longest-serving monarch died, and she had to deal with all of that. I mean, that was a real moment.
Yeah. In the first 2 weeks of her premiership, completely overshadowed. Indeed, of course, news emerged that the Queen was on her deathbed during an announcement in Parliament when Liz Truss announced this huge multi-billion-pound sort of help for people over their domestic energy bills, and that sort of just got disappeared in the huge story about the loss of the Queen. But it's really interesting. I mean, lots of people who've reviewed your book are pointing out, and it is, I mean, such a stark opening sentence for a biography. She came, she saw, she crashed. Is there an element, though? I mean, and you spoke to Liz Truss, you spoke to Kwasi Kwarteng, her Chancellor, until he was sacked by her, of course. You spoke to them personally, and many people who work very closely with Liz Truss in Number 10, and people who know her well, some who like her a lot, some who don't like her very much. Is there an element where she's basically been blamed for everything? There were lots of economic issues we already had. The Bank of England's failures, in terms of the investments the pensions and things that could have gone wrong. A lot of people are pointing out that interest rate hikes would have happened anyway. They happened elsewhere, and it was just a matter of time. But she, by the announcement she made, by the lack of sort of preparation for the money markets, brought this on. But has she been unfairly criticised? Because people are saying, no, she's the worst Prime Minister we ever had. Her tenure in office compared with that life of a lettuce. Has she been unfairly criticised, do you think?
Well, I can see why some people think that, but it's a cruel job, Julia, to be Prime Minister, because the focus is totally on you. Yeah. And if things go well, you take the credit. And when things go badly, as many predecessor Prime Ministers have found out to their remorse, you get blamed for stuff that is not your fault. Mm. In her particular case, it was very much her mini budget. She drove it through. She didn't listen to reservations from Kwasi Kwarteng and others. It was the speed of it. I mean, she admired Margaret Thatcher, I think, rightly for what she did, but she didn't follow what Margaret Thatcher did, which was to bide her time, take her time, get people on side, measure things out. She took 2 years, Thatcher, and if only she'd slowed it all down, brought the team behind her properly, brought people on side, then I think it could have been a very different.
It could have been. This is the thing. I wonder. It's the 3 Ps, wasn't it? Was the fault the policy? Was it the presentation and the preparation as well? I added a 4th one, or was it her personality? Because so much what comes through in this book, and from so many people who know Liz Truss, and I've interviewed her a number of times. I like her, but she's I suppose she's a funny fish. Do you know what I mean? She's an interesting character. She's very different to most politicians who are often very glad-handy and charming and friendly. She doesn't do a lot of that stuff. She does come across very differently from many politicians. So much of her personality seems to be, I'm a comp girl, you're the establishment, you're out to get me, I'm going to put 2 fingers up to you. Do you think that her personality was actually a large part of her downfall?
Yes, I do. And there was a chippiness there, a sense that they've always been against me. I've come up from I didn't go to public school. I fought my way up. I've always had people against me. People have always patronized me as a woman, as somebody who wasn't part of the male Tory public school establishment club. They haven't liked my ideas. Why should I trust them? I'm going to blow them all apart. And you can understand that, but it wasn't, had it worked, Julia, we'd be having a very different conversation. We'd be saying, wasn't it amazing? She had such courage, like Thatcher. She stuck to her guns. The ladies not for turning, but Thatcher just did it in a much more sensible way. There's a quality of judgment that leaders of any organisation need to display, and ultimately Liz Truss lacked it for all her qualities and all the rightness of the policy. So it wasn't the policy, although she should have broken the policy down and made a more balanced budget. It wasn't the policy as much. The presentation wasn't good because she didn't let people know in advance about it all coming
And again,
up.
it's about setting the, sort of preparing the ground, isn't it? But again, the supposed thing that broke, Camel's back was a money down the back of the sofa in terms of government spending, in terms of cutting the top rate of income tax, compared with the huge billions that were going to be borrowed to pay for people's to subsidise people's heating bills, which, by the way, was completely supported by now the current Labour regime. I suppose my just final question I want to ask you really is did you, having interviewed Liz Truss and spoken to so many people who worked with her, did you like her more or less by the time you'd finished writing the book?
Well, Julia, you won't like the answer, but both. I liked more her courage, her irrepressible self-belief, the clarity of the vision. There's much to admire about her on a personal
We often cry out for that in our politicians, don't we?
We do. And too many people have become Prime Minister really without a clue about exactly what they were going to do. She knew almost too well. But there again, on the other side, she wasn't always very kind to people. People who worked with her, Thatcher was always very kind to the people. Look at Charles Moore's biography. Always very kind to the people who she talked to. Liz Truss could be waspish, mean, and set people off against each other. So she had some unfortunate personality traits. And clearly, when things went wrong, she should have taken the blame. And I think we'd be thinking, having a different conversation, Julia, if she'd said, look, including on her her constituency election during the general election, she wasn't trying to blame other people. Great leaders know that they're going to make mistakes. Yeah, it would have been better. It's not too late for her to come out.
I think for a lot of people it probably is. But again, making unnecessary enemies as a politician is always a bad idea. It's absolutely fascinating to talk to you. It's a fascinating book. In fact, you managed to get 365 pages out of 49 days is extraordinary. It's really intriguing. Sir Anthony Seldon, writing with Jonathan Meakin, I should add. Truss at 10, How Not to Be Prime Minister. Big thanks to Anthony Seldon for joining us.